Well, hello everyone. It's John Laughland here. I'm the director of Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. My co-hosts Peter Lavelle in Moscow and Jeremy Nell in Cape Town are delighted to welcome as our main guest this week Larry Johnson, who is asked to be introduced as an old guy with an opinion.
Yes.
That's an extremely modest way of putting it. We all know that you've got not just opinions, but immense critical analysis, Larry. And we've asked you this week to join us, and we're very grateful, to discuss the United States national security strategy. It's the 17th of December today. The document was published last week. Lots of people talked about it. Other things have happened in the meantime, but I think it's worth going over. As I see it, there are at least two readings of this document, at least as far as Europe is concerned, because I think it was the chapter on Europe which attracted the most attention. One of them is that the United States is ditching Europe, walking back from the Ukraine war, leaving Europe to pick up the mess that America, created, largely anyway, and that the transatlantic alliance is more or less over, the dead parrot of the Monty Python sketch.
Yeah.
There's another reading, and that is that it's full-on Trumpism being blasted like a sort of flamethrower at the decadent European elites, globalist elites in Brussels and in the European capitals, and that the new strategy of the United States is to Trumpify Europe. The document, after all, talks about encouraging resistance. It uses the word resistance, encouraging resistance within Europe to the current hegemony of globalism over European countries. That resistance, of course, is borne largely by people that indeed Trump and the Trump administration are very friendly towards. Viktor Orban in Hungary, the AfD in Germany, and so on. Larry, do you share this, either or both of these readings of the document? What's your understanding of what it means about the Atlantic Alliance, NATO, and America's role in Europe?
Well, I think we got the first hint of the shift by the Trump administration away from Europe when J.D. Vance gave his speech, was it back in February at the Munich Security Council, our conference? That sort of was throwing a pail of cold water over all the Europeans who were shocked and sort of horrified by what does this mean? Well, now it has been written down in this national security strategy. I'm fascinated by just the attention that this document is getting. I don't recall ever,
I agree.
over the last, good Lord, 40 years, where, because presidents come out and publish these things, and nobody's ever gone, oh my God, did you read that? And, when I looked at it specifically to see what it said about Ukraine. It was pretty fun. I found it pretty amusing. I know the Europeans didn't, because basically it was
that made it amusing. That made it amusing.
Here, this is yours. Take it. And the Europeans going, oh, well, where's the checkbook? But this document, I think, also is reflective of Donald Trump. He's a big talker, says lots of outlandish, outrageous things, but then when it comes to actually doing something, it doesn't always get done. So
yeah, I mean, the fact that it's being talked about, whereas no previous document has been in the same way,
right,
shouldn't really surprise us, because we talk about Trump probably more than we talk about any previous American president. His whole shtick, as you've more or less implied, Larry, is to say things that are so outrageous and then walk out of the room that everyone is left in a state of shock talking about the man who's just left the room.
Yeah, and Larry, I mean, I don't want to sandbag you or anything, but a lot of things happened today. Apparently, according to the New York Times and Bloomberg, is that the Trump peace plan has been agreed to. Well, that's how they would phrase it. But if you look at it carefully, it is the Trump administration, at least as we're speaking right now, have caved to the Europeans. So if we take today's events and we take the national security strategy, questioning transnational organizations, NATO being one of them, the United Nations, obviously, and outsourcing the Ukraine problem to the Europeans, and taking in the document a kind of benign position towards Russia, I mean, this document has not been circulating very long. I mean, I don't know what to make of any of this right now, okay? Because the Europeans apparently have very few cards to play, are playing low cards very, very well.
Yeah. Well, let's look at the timing of so these stories. I hadn't seen them yet, but tonight Donald Trump has got a speech scheduled at 9 p.m. East Coast time, and apparently he's going to tout all of his great accomplishments. Now, I think Peter and John, we're all old enough to remember when Coca-Cola launched New Coke and kept telling everybody, "Boy, this is really good. You should drink it." and the public was going, "Bah," tastes like horse urine. So that's the position Donald Trump is in. He's trying to market him. His administration is New Coke, and people aren't buying it across the board. Hey, we got the greatest economy ever. And meanwhile, unemployment creeps up. Inflation remains high. All those countries that were lining up, to quote Donald Trump, not my words, to kiss his ass over tariffs. The line's not very long. Okay. There's a pretty short line when it gets to it. The Houthis ran the United States out of the Red Sea. He's now kept troops and ships off the coast of Venezuela for 4 or 5 months, and talks, but doesn't do always. And when he does something, it's usually counterproductive. So this agreement, so-called agreement, that I think all they're saying is that Ukraine and the Europeans have got the United States to agree what they want to do, but Russia has a say in this.
Yep.
And the Russians have been unequivocal in what their position is. The West keeps touting in the news media over here that, well, we're not sure that Ukraine is going to give up all of the Donbass, in particular Donetsk. I'm going, have you guys been listening? They've made it, Putin said it, Lavrov said it, Rybkov said it, everybody said it, that the Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, that is permanent Russian territory. And the West is either going to accept it, or the Russians are going to bring it home militarily.
But Larry, it's actually it's interesting if you look at it very carefully. And at least we don't have an official document, and I don't know what is the legal standing. And is this a EU document, American document, and a NATO document? Is made very unclear. It's unclear what the standing is. It's unclear what Witkoff is. Is he a signatory to this? What is his signature worth? But what things have been compounded, and I know obviously Western media, because they're so gleeful on what they perceive to be a unified Western position, that these security guarantees, Article 5 that sounds like being a little bit pregnant to me. Either it's Article 5 or it's not.
Right.
Okay. And the reporting is that they're robust security guarantees. So if that is given to the Zelensky regime, why would they accept any kind of territorial loss? Because they have security guarantees. I mean, I don't know. The people that are writing these things are not particularly bright. Okay, I'm just a talk show host, and I could see through that in an instant.
Yeah. Well, when you realize the statistics on literacy in the United States, the literacy rate now is 79%. It used to be in the 90s. It's now 79%, and the 50% of those who are literate read at the 6th grade level or lower. Okay, so that tells you why you've got people that can write garbage like this and not have a shred of critical thinking. Russia, if I could give any advice to President Putin and his team. Now, if they're going to have an agreement with the United States in particular, it must be a treaty that is ratified by the U.S. Senate. Barring that, no agreement with the West is going to be worth paper or the computer it's written on, because the West is committed to the destruction of Russia. And I don't always, I don't know if the Russians actually understand that and appreciate
I think the Russians understand it. I think my question would be, is what you've just said still true under Trump? And that brings me back to the national security strategy, because there are friendly passages about Russia. There's talk about economic mutual benefits and things like that. And of course, obviously, as we know, the Americans, or at least as we think we know, the Americans seem to have been pressuring the Europeans and the Ukrainians to give up territory. Do you think that what's in the national security strategy is correct, or do you think, as I probably fear as well, that in fact the deep state is still very much in control?
Now, deep state's still very much in control. I look for tangible actions by the Trump administration. What have they actually done? Have they restored direct flights between the United States and Moscow and St. Petersburg? Niet. No. Have they given back the property, the Russian property that was confiscated by Obama in December 2016? No. Had they even appointed an ambassador who's has some stature and a reputation, at least, for access to Trump? No, that hasn't happened. Now, there is one sign, a glimmer of hope. The other day I was interviewed by John Kiriakou on whistleblowers. It was taken off air more than a year ago, about the same time that the FBI was raiding Scott Ritter's place, and the sanctions that had been imposed, and a number of RT contributors were off air because of sanctions being brought against RT. Well, John's back on air now, and I said, "What happened?" He goes, "They've lifted the ban." So, but that's been done very quietly. So, it looks like the Trump administration is at least taking a baby step forward. But there's still a lot more that has to be seen.
Yeah, but I'm not going to disagree with you, but I think at the same time is that the Trump administration, does the left hand know what the right hand's doing?
Right.
Okay. And I think that is kind of a problem here. Also, it seems to me the Ukraine issue is transmigrated, as it were, if we look at the rhetoric that's coming out of Europe. And I'm keeping in mind the national security agenda that has been presented by the Trump administration. If it looks like Ukraine is turning into a bridge, they want to keep the war going so NATO can retool, keep the Russia threat alive. I mean, I look at this microscopically. The drones, I think it was Estonia or Latvia that balloons carrying contraband cigarettes.
Yeah.
My goodness, this is hybrid war. Okay. I mean, and all of these claims that they make, there's no photographic evidence of it. It's never been presented. Okay. They want to keep the drumbeat going, and they want to make sure, to use the British term, that the Americans are a backstop. Okay. So the new national security strategy is maybe somebody's wish list, and I think we all know who actually wrote most of it, but it doesn't reflect, as you said, actions.
Who do you think did write it, Peter?
Elbridge Colby.
Colby, yeah.
The grandson of William
like
Colby.
He wrote the Trump's Middle East tour.
But I mean, of course, I understand what you're both saying about Trump being all mouth and no trousers. But surely there are very substantial, very profound differences in the approach. We're talking about the Ukraine war. I wanted to talk about the national security strategy in general. But even if only on Ukraine, to put it very simply, Trump says he wants the war to end, and the Europeans clearly don't. And that's quite a radical difference, as radical as the phrases in the document about civilizational erasure or whatever it was for.
But John, You could, but I would, okay, the civilization erasure is a different issue for me. But I see a lot of continuity. The Americans just want to outsource Ukraine to the Europeans, and Europe is still a conduit for American hegemony. It's just American hegemony is being rebranded, okay, and it's being outsourced. So, so little of the document talked about the Middle East. Why? Because that's Israel's. We've outsourced that to Israel, okay, and to the Gulf monarchies, okay. So they're little beehive there. It's just they're spinning it in a different way, but I don't think the level of hegemony is going to diminish in any way. They're just reframing it, okay, reimagining it as the left.
Yeah, sure. So in other words, you're with, let's say, we mentioned him, I think a week or two ago, Brian Berletic, who says that all this stuff about a breakdown is just
he's the most hardcore. He's the most hardcore out there.
Well,
Larry,
what's going on here, I think, is the system that was put in place at the end of World War II, and Bretton Woods, United Nations, the sort of this international rules-based order, that whole contraption is in the process of collapse. It's falling apart. The rise of BRICS and the shift of Russia to the east and to the global south it's not just a momentary thing.
Yeah,
and the West is unable to grasp that. Now, what's again, I find it amusing is that the Europeans still think they're relevant, that they're important. They're not. What do they make? They used to be the center of, the Industrial Revolution started in Europe, and now it's moving overseas. Europe used to be a center for great science and technology, some of, particularly in the 19th century. But no longer. There's if Europe has anything approaching, like Silicon Valley, or I'm not sure what the area is called in China, but China is just light years ahead. And yet here the big three, Germany, France, the UK, continue to indulge this fantasy that they're relevant, and increasingly, like in Russia, they're going, what do we need these guys for? All they are is a malevolent threat. They're like that deadbeat cousin who's a meth addict that comes to try to live with you, eat your food, trash your house, and doesn't do anything productive. And within Europe itself, it's fracturing. They're not coalescing, and everybody said, yeah, we got to hang together. We're, with Hungary, Croatia, Slovakia, Austria, the increasing number are starting to say, we're not so sure about this program. And then the decisions of the European collective to, we don't want that inexpensive oil and gas from Russia. We'd rather pay exorbitant prices and drive our societies to the brink of collapse. I mean, you'd step back and say no rational people could come up with this, but that's what they're doing. So the fact that even I think within the Trump administration, there's a recognition, what is Europe good for? What does it provide?
That's in the document. That's in the document. That's when they say, the document says, will these countries still be allies? And it happens to be in the context of civilizational erasure. What they mean is, if the place is full of Muslims, then will these countries still be our allies? But essentially, that's what what you've just said, Larry, is what the document says.
Yeah. Well,
that's pretty major.
Yeah. Here's where Russia could actually be of help to Europe. Russia has a lot of Muslims too. They have 140 different ethnic groups. Mm-hmm. They've got other religious groups. Yet somehow they've been able to navigate that where these Muslims see themselves as Russians, and they love Russia. I spent I was with Abdi Aludinov, General Abdi Aludinov, hero of the Soviet Union, hero of Russia, and he's a devout Muslim, but by God, he is one of the top soldiers in the Russian army. And so here's Russia that's managed to, despite the Chechen civil war that was sparked by the West, again, this effort to poke, prod, and destroy, the Russians have overcome that, and they've got something that's genuine that they could, I think, really teach the world. Let us show you how you can get along with different people without having to go kill them.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to, you have to remember that the Russian Empire was a continuous land empire, and they had contact with the Muslim world for a very long time. And it wasn't it wasn't it wasn't Western imperialism in the same sense of the colonization of the West. No, Larry, it's called Ruski Mir, the Russia world.
Yeah,
and it's very, very simple. Language is very important. Respect for the Orthodox Church, which stands above all other religions. However, the catch is this: if non-Orthodox see the I wouldn't say the primacy of the Orthodox Church is going to protect you. I'm going to protect your faith and your communities. Okay. It works out very well. As I tell people all the time, walking down, and Larry will know this because I know he's been visiting quite often, is that every fifth person you pass on the streets of Moscow is Muslim.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't know that in a Western context. Okay.
No. But Larry, if the post-world order world order is crashing down, and if Europe is irrelevant, as you say, and I think you're right, do you think that the American administration, including the deep state, has taken this on board, and is that reflected in this national security strategy? In other words, are the rude words about Europe the reflection of the understanding of the thing that you've just said, Larry?
Not fully. I think there is some acceptance of that, but still we get, that hasn't cooled the bombast out of Trump. America's got the greatest army ever. There's no other military that can match up with us. And you're going, okay, explain to me how that great military got routed by the Houthis. We're not talking some modern industrial power in Yemen. Some aspects of it, they're still, well entrenched in the 16th century, but yet fierce warriors, and the age of the aircraft carrier is gone because of hypersonic missiles. And again, we get it. This is where the United States used to have an edge technologically across the board, but now, Russia's got 5 variants of hypersonic missiles at least.
Sure.
The United States doesn't even have one that's deployed and been tested. China, similarly, it has some. And so why I emphasize the hypersonic missile is it is the death knell of the aircraft carrier. And the U.S., its power has been, has depended heavily upon naval power to project force using the aircraft carriers. And,
absolutely.
But now we see the limits of that, and we're watching the limits of that off of Venezuela, because you've got these ships, but they're afraid to get too close because what? Venezuela has some missiles as a result of the relationships with China, Russia, and Iran that could sink those ships. So they're making a big noise about being a formidable force, but staying at distance because they don't really want to risk that.
Larry, I'd like to reformulate John's question, because there's so much to that question. I think there's a recognition that Europe is less and less relevant. However, this kind of outsourcing of empire, Europe does have utility to keep the Russians bogged down, keep their attention, keeping them from averting their gaze completely to the global south. The Europeans do play an instrumental role in American foreign policy. I mean, the Americans despise the Europeans despise the Americans. But from the American perspective is that, look, we got these clowns to buy our equipment and give it to the Ukrainian. I mean, that's a pretty good, sweet gig. Okay. So, I mean, there's a utility toward in it, but I don't think the current administration, and I think future ones, irrespective of who wins the next election, will not frame it as the post-World War II Western world alliance. No, they have a purpose. You keep the Russians busy. Do you think the United States wants to go back to superpower America and superpower Russia? No, Russia is a great power. It's not a superpower, okay? And they got to keep their eye on rising China. So the Europeans play that role. And the Europeans will do it in an ideological one that's completely bankrupt. And the Trump people have, they want to support Viktor Orban, Alternative for Germany. Okay, fine, they'll have that difference. But as long as the Europeans will throw their resources at containing Russia, keeping Russia, because this is what it is. It just Ukraine is a headache. It's not a strategic threat to Russia. It's a headache the way this war is going on.
Well, it was, I would say it was a potential strategic threat. At least that's how the West.
Well, it could be if the United States will back this ridiculous security guarantees, and yes, then it's existential. I agree.
Yeah, when you go back over the last 30 years, that and I was sort of shocked as I dug into it, how Ukraine became a de facto member of NATO in roughly 1997. Yeah, and I marked that with
it was one of the first countries to join the NATO, the various informal structures. Yeah, exactly. Partnership for Peace.
Well, when NATO established this base at Yavoriv in western Ukraine, that became really a NATO sub headquarters, and I recall early on in the special military operation, as I was doing some research, I uncovered at the website of the U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, they had an entire section devoted to these training activities at Yavoriv. And normally the NATO and the U.S. characterize these military exercises as defensive in nature. Well, there on that website, it said explicitly they were teaching offensive cyber attacks, cyber war. That was one of the things that was being taught at Yavoriv. Under Trump, when Trump became president in 2017, the number of annual military exercises that Ukraine participated in increased. They were doing like 5 a year as opposed to 4 or 3 that had been the case under Obama and Bush. It was under Trump that somebody in September of 2020 or 2019 thought it a great idea to have B-52 bombers fly along the Black Sea coast as part of an exercise. So this attempt, Ukraine was simply, it's an important, it's more like a rook or a knight on a chessboard. It wasn't just a pawn. It was to play a role to destroy Russia. And
it had, at the advent of the special military operation, Ukraine had the second largest military in Europe. Yeah.
So this is, this plan it's blown up in the face of the West, because here's the problem with Europe. They talk a good game about buying all this equipment from the United States. Where's the money? Show me the money. The debt to GDP ratio in the UK, my understanding is, it's now exceeded 100%. In France, it's 116%. And in Germany, who used to be have a reputation for fiscal responsibility, their legislature passed a bill, said, all right, you can go do some deficit spending. And so none of this is trending in a direction that they could, that as we saw, let's go back to the mustache man of the 1930s, when Germany was building up a genuine military capability, and they were coming out of the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic. They were actually, building tanks, building planes, building submarines, and Europe's not building anything that I can see.
That's that's absolutely right, and I'm struck. We've said this many times on this show already. I was struck yet again yesterday. So it's the 17th of December today, by this what I like to call this willful or even triumphal illusionism in Europe. So the best example for me, I've said it before, but I repeat it again, the agreement between Ukraine and France to buy 100 Rafale fighter jets. Well, France doesn't have 100 Rafale fighter jets, and Ukraine doesn't have the money. I've said it, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's an emblematic moment. It was a very emblematic moment. And there was another one yesterday, 16th of December, in The Hague, where Zelensky and the Council of Europe signed the Committee on Reparations. So they're going to impose reparations now on Russia, a country which, as we know, has not even yet been defeated. But it's all part of creating illusion. And similarly, and that's why I agree with Peter's remark about how Europe will just do the dirty work of niggling away at Russia via Ukraine. This thing you mentioned a few moments ago, Peter, about Article 5 type guarantees. Well, as you say, it's like being half pregnant. It doesn't mean anything. Not only does it not mean anything because you say Article 5 type, that's what they say, but Article 5 itself doesn't mean anything. Because Article 5 of the NATO treaty says an attack on one will be considered an attack on all. And then second sentence says the member states of NATO will decide what to do in this circumstance. In other words, it doesn't oblige anybody to do anything, Article 5. Never mind an Article 5 type thing. So Europe is just literally bogged down ever further in illusionism and of course in more and more obsessive attempts to control the narrative. But I suppose I'm holding out for some kind of hope, rather desperately, I admit, that reality is breaking in Washington, Larry. That the great deal maker, the art of the deal, the great real estate mogul with his son-in-law, who is also into real estate, and Witkoff and so on. That these people have their feet on the ground and they actually want to at least make some money out of it all. Am I just clutching at straws? Is this then just pissing in the wind?
Yeah. Well,
okay. And Larry, what does it take? The loss of Odessa to focus their attention?
Yeah. Look, I believe that this thing will ultimately be settled with Russia occupying Kyiv, Nikolaev, and Odessa. They'll be up to all territory east of the Dnieper River will be under Russian control. I think it'll only be at that point that the West will finally awaken to the reality. Europe will finally concede, okay, it's over. The problem with Trump is age right now. I think he really is suffering some mental impairment. If you saw his response to the murder of the Hollywood producer and director Rob Reiner and his wife, I mean it's like even staunch supporters of Trump are going, "What's wrong with you?" Because to come out and claim that Rob Reiner was killed because of his hatred for Donald Trump. I mean, it's one thing to think that, but then to commit that to paper. And
Larry, I don't know if you saw it, but I mean, I guess now it's a few weeks ago, the interview that Trump did with Laura Ingraham. I mean, my response was he's lost his marbles.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not even MAGA.
Yeah, no,
he wasn't even MAGA in that interview.
Yeah, he's suffering. And then if you saw the Vanity Fair interview, a 2-part series with Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, she described Donald Trump as he behaves like an alcoholic, even though he doesn't. He's a teetotaler, and she was the daughter of Pat Summerall, a famous American football player and then later broadcaster, who was an alcoholic. So she has some basis for judging the character traits and behavior of alcoholics. And so it was not flattering. So, what I think what we're going to be seeing here over the next couple of months is more chaos within the Trump administration. Probably the exit of Susie Wiles, the exit of Pam Bondi,
Kash Patel, Pete Hegseth.
Yeah. It's not a stable group. Number one, Trump's going to continue to try to put lipstick on the pig tonight by saying how great the great accomplishments of his administration. But the reality is creeping in, and his numbers continue to drop. And so and at some point they will start paying attention to those numbers.
Well, Larry, looking at the calendar here, at least for the Western world, things going to start shutting down for the holidays, for Christmas and for New Year's.
Right.
And the timing of today's events with the Europeans, again, we haven't seen any kind of document. I'm only relying upon sources that I don't trust, to say the mild critique of that. But I mean, the timing is really important here too, because basically the Europeans seemingly seem to have rolled the Trump administration again, and now the ball is in Russia's court, and that's very convenient. Now these European leaders must be exhausted by going to these well-funded banquets and meetings and business class treatment. I mean, I would be exhausted by it by now. But obviously, they want to throw it into Russia's court. Russia hasn't seen. I'd like to point out to our viewers all of the plans: the 28 plan, the 20-point plan, the 19 one. I don't know how many are out there right now. Russia has not reacted officially to any of them. Now it's in Russia's court. Of course, they're going to say no. This is all by plan.
They're sitting there saying we haven't seen it yet. So we hear all the talk in the media. We haven't seen it. It was Eve Smith, I think, who described this whole negotiation process that takes place where the Europeans meet with the Ukrainians, with Zelensky and the United States, and they negotiate with themselves, forgetting that Russia should be in the room and should have a say. But actually, this has been Trump's style. Remember the Sharm el-Sheikh so-called peace agreement, ceasefire. It was like holding a wedding without the bride and groom there, because neither Israel or Palestine was present to assign anything, agree to anything, but it's just Trump. We declare peace and we're off to the races. And it looks like he's actually trying to do the same kind of thing with Ukraine and Russia. And Russia is, they're pressing forward militarily. They right now are in a stronger position on the ground in terms of troops. They've been building up steadily. When they started off the special military operation, they had about 275,000 ground troops back in 2022. Now they're up around 1.5 million and continuing to grow. And Ukraine, the minister, I think Russian Ministry of Defense said that the Ukraine suffered 500,000 casualties
this
last year. Just this year. Yeah, and so the likelihood that total casualties over time in Ukraine are approaching 2 million, well, at least 1.5 million. So, I think Russia would like to see a diplomatic settlement if possible.
Sure.
But Russia's been fooled enough. They got played. Putin admitted he got played on Minsk too by Merkel and Hollande, and he's not going to let that happen again.
Larry, let's go back to the national security strategy, because if we could change the focus to the Western Hemisphere, I've read it 3 times, and it's, in my mind, it's not ambiguous, but the words are a little ambiguous. Is the United States is trying to throw China, particularly, and including Russia, out of the Western Hemisphere completely. I mean, no, it's not like you can't have military maneuvers with them. No, we want your companies, we want your infrastructure, we want all of it out. Is that your reading?
Well, yeah, that's the rhetorical position they've staked out. But again, it reflects the ignorance of what has taken place over the last 30 years. I started in my consulting firm when we were doing product counterfeiting investigations in Panama, the Colón Free Trade Zone, which sits at the north end of the Panama. Most people don't know, they believe that the Panama Canal runs east-west. It runs north-south. And so the Colón Free Trade Zone was the second largest free trade zone outside of Hong Kong 30 years ago. Well, the Chinese were all over that. I mean, they've been running the ports in Cologne. Cologne's got 3 major ports that handle commercial cargo. The Chinese have been running those for 30 years. And you notice that during Trump's first administration, 2017 to 2020, he didn't say a thing about the Chinese influence in the hemisphere. It didn't suddenly get worse. It's been there all along. And what China, though, is doing now effectively is they're more like the Salvation Army than the mafia. Okay? The United States is acting like the mafia with a protection racket. We'll come in and, you give us a little bit of money and we make sure your country doesn't catch on fire.
Yeah, nice little country you have here. Wouldn't want something to happen to it.
Yeah, but whereas the Chinese come in and they are building up. They're building infrastructure. They're not coming in to create colonies, and they do not come with a colonial mindset. The United States does. And these countries increasingly, they're getting fed up with it. And so no matter, yes, you're correct that national security strategy does basically say we're going to return and make South and Central America great again with us. But the countries aren't necessarily going to cooperate. And I think, Brazil in particular with BRICS recognizes there are too many financial benefits to be had from the relationship with China, Russia, and India than there are with the United States.
Yeah, but they still have those aircraft carriers, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, I mean, as somebody who lives in South Africa, I can tell you right now that our imports from BRICS countries has dramatically increased. And I mean, I don't really know what we import from the States, other than perhaps threats of war and and sanctions. I mean, our market now is being saturated with Chinese products, which feeds into what you're saying. And the thing is that right across Africa we have infrastructure being developed with Chinese money. We have 5G networks going up everywhere. We've got high-speed trains. I can't tell you a single project that I think the British or the Americans have actually built.
Well, in fact, let's go back over the last 150 years with the European colonial empires. It's been an attitude of raping Africa, not building up, not increasing the welfare of the people, leaving them impoverished just as long as we get, we're like a leech. Or a tick, sucking the blood out of them. And
sorry, hang on, Larry. I don't want to make it sound as if we're hating on America. That's not at all.
I'm hating on my own country for what we've been doing. I mean, we've been a pernicious influence by and large. The death toll we've left behind in these various countries, and then again, not going in to build up and say, how can we help? It is this, what can we do to get to use them?
Yeah, because the Chinese will say, well, we'll build you infrastructure, we'll help build up your economy so you can buy our goods. Okay. Yeah. Oh, well, that's an exchange. That's an exchange. Okay.
That's Pete.
I'm agreeing with Larry. I mean, the Western imperial powers didn't build these countries up to be good consumers of the West.
No, but there is a counter argument that it's soft power. It's a long game to colonize the African continent. What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, the Western argument is, Russia and China are these imperial powers trying to conquer the world. And I go back and say, tell me about all those Russian colonies in Central and South America. And give me the list that's there in Africa. And how about in Asia? Zero. And the same for China. China, we got at least 600-800 years of history. I know I'm not an expert on Chinese history, but I don't recall the Chinese going out and establishing colonies over the last 800 years around the world. They've stayed at home. They've been, they've worried about what's on their periphery. All countries should do that, but neither Russia nor China have this colonial mindset. They tell a joke in Hollywood about two Hollywood agents. Hollywood agents are notorious for being blood suckers. And these two agents are sitting there and they watch this beautiful starlet walk by. And one says to the other, "I'd like to screw her." And the other agent says, "Out of what?" Okay. and that's sort of how the West approaches the relationship.
But Larry, the national security strategy, again, one of the things I took away from it, and it's kind of echoing something that you've already said, is that the looking at this great power return to McKinley, 19th century.
Mackinder, you mean, or McKinley?
Both. Okay. But it's a policy of denying others, denying Russia influence in the Middle East, denying China's influence. It's not a positive thing. Like, we have a better recipe for you. Okay. No, we just don't want you to deal with these people. And that's the difference here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I got some insight into this during my recent visit to Moscow. I got to sit down and chat with a hockey legend, Vyacheslav Fetisov, and he was describing the adjustment or the shock he had when he left the Soviet Union with permission in 1989, came to the United States to play hockey. And what he described is the way the United States and the Canadians play hockey. It's all this individualism. It's about one person trying to be the star. And he came out, and it wasn't just the Soviet or communist system, but he came out of a culture that, even though he was a star, he was all about teamwork. How do I work with my other members of the team? How do we all help each other get better? And that is a definite cultural difference between Russia and the West, I would argue, particularly in the United States. And that tendency to want to cooperate, collaborate, as opposed to dominate is, that's still inherent in this national security strategy. It's just, okay, maybe we can't dominate China and Russia so much, but by God, we can take care of Mexico, Venezuela, and Brazil.
Yeah, it's kind of a
Larry, I'm very struck by what you said about Sharm el-Sheikh, and it was like having the wedding without the bride and groom. Surely that takes us back to what I said a few moments ago about illusionism. And what you're saying with this story is that Trump is the same. It's just all make-believe. But if it's all make-believe, when is the reality going to break in? Tomorrow, on the 18th of December, the European Council is going to seize 210 billion euros or dollars in Russian assets. Surely that will cause the Eurozone economy to collapse, and maybe the whole of the rest of the Western system as well. When is reality going to break in? When is the illusionism going to run out of road?
Well, when Russia turns around and seizes, my understanding is there's at least 800 billion, maybe close to $1 trillion of European assets still in Russia. The Russians aren't going to react emotionally, though. They are very much follow the law, and we're going to do things by the numbers. And it's going to be the same awakening in the West that Russia experienced with the collapse of the Soviet Union. There came a point where that Soviet system broke down, and all of a sudden something new was there, and it wasn't good. And when you go back and look at what happened to Russia in the 1990s, I think that's actually the future that awaits Europe and the United States. It's going to be when the economic crisis hits and it becomes severe, then they're going to be forced to wake up. But it's too late. There are things they could have done to prevent that. They're not taking those steps, and that's where Trump is he's surrounded by sycophants. You got to tell him how great he is, and if you dare to tell him he's not great, he bristles and takes offense, and then seeks
to become a traitor. MTG became a traitor.
Yeah. I mean, just that to even use that kind of language, is just, and so I'd always held. I admit I'm naive. I held out hope that Trump would have learned something from the pain of the last 8 years.
And that's what makes this all human, Larry. I had hoped you. John, I think you've used this phrase to answer your own question. I think you've used this on this podcast here, but it's worth repeating. Ernest Hemingway on bankruptcy, okay? And he wrote, how do you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually,
slowly,
and
then suddenly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, indeed.
Yeah, no,
well, I mean, you've said, Larry, that the decisive moment will come with Odessa and Nikolaev and possibly Kiev as well. But again, I asked that question myself in Russia to Dmitry Medvedev just over a year ago, thinking that perhaps crossing the Dnieper was imminent. But here we are a year later, and it's still imminent, or at least still hasn't happened. So I ask again, how long is this sort of strange, not stalemate, but this strange sort of intermediate period going to last? Maybe it's the Hemingway slowly bit, and then maybe, as you've said, Peter, it will just be very sudden, and then we'll all be left shaking our heads. What do you think, Larry?
Well, let me come back to what the Western military analysts and their criticism of Russia about how slow they're moving. Now, these are the very same analysts that failed to conquer Afghanistan. They got driven out by the Taliban, by a bunch of goat herders that didn't have NATO intelligence, NATO military equipment being funneled into them. And what we've seen take place militarily with respect to Ukraine and Russia is that it is a genuine special military operation. A war would be full mobilization. Russia has at least 5 million reservists. My friend Stanislav Krapivnik, Stas, says there's actually closer to 10 million. And he's not one given to embellishment. So Russia has the capability that if they had to go full-blown war, they could do it, but they haven't. And it has been actually a gradual buildup. If you recall, back in 2022, that Russia went into Ukraine initially in February with about 125 to 160,000 soldiers and secured an area that was 1,300 kilometers long. And they succeeded in compelling the Ukrainians to come to the negotiating table. And when I spoke with Foreign Minister Lavrov in March with Judge Napolitano, Lavrov was very clear. He said, look, we agreed, the agreement that we signed off on was brought to the table by Ukraine. We were willing to settle. United States didn't settle. After that, Ukraine mobilized its 900,000 reservists, pushing their total ground forces to like 1.2 million. And it was only in September of 2022 that Russia said, okay, we're going to mobilize 320,000. But they've been steadily building up. And that's one of the reasons Russia literally did not have the mass force capable of launching one of these big ground operations. Now they do. And that's why we're seeing these attacks along at least 8 different avenues or axes. And the Ukrainians don't have anything to respond to it. It's
and one of the things that's fundamentally misunderstood in the West, because there's the received memory of the Soviet steamroller on its way to Berlin. And this is a very different conflict, and I agree with Larry, is that this strategy that they've pursued, it's slow, but they want the Ukrainians to come to them. See, what they want to do is destroy the Ukrainian military. They're not necessarily destroying the state, and certainly not society.
Right.
But I think there's an important point as we run out of time here, is Russia has a vertically integrated military industrial complex. Okay, it's not dependent. They're not dependent on the Chinese. Certainly the technology they've gotten from Iran on drones is welcomed. Okay, but we all have to keep in mind, and I think this is a good way to kind of a good summation here, is that Russia is preparing for a conflict with NATO. Okay,
Yes.
and this will be the third time in a little more than a century that the West has created a coalition against Russia. That's how they see all of this.
Yeah.
And so they do not need to mobilize now, but they are prepared and they can do it now if necessary. Everybody keep in mind, as you have the bussification videos, I see them every day, okay? 30 to 30,000 young men volunteer, go to the military. Okay, you don't have to grab them off the street. Okay,
Yeah.
They willingly, patriotically go. So there's a long game here. Trump and the Europeans and the ceasefire and all this, that's all nonsense here. The long view is, as long as this pernicious, offensive military organization called NATO exists, they will be prepared for war.
Yeah. One of the things the West is the only thing the West has been good at is the propaganda.
Sure.
To paint Russia as this authoritarian, evil dictator, communist state. And along with that, most people, particularly in the United States, they don't understand that during World War II, during the Great Patriotic War, there were at least 13 European countries that were fighting on the side of the Nazis attacking the then Soviet Union. So it's not, we like to think, oh, those Russians are paranoid. By God, they've got a good reason for it. They're not, it's not imaginary.
Yeah. But as you say, Larry, it's and as I've said, the question is reality. When will reality break in? Yeah. You mentioned the mobilization in September 2022. That was also, of course, the time when the 4 regions were annexed. If you remember,
Correct.
That was also, and so Russia has been doing what our other guest Ian Proud calls escalation dominance, which is to say moving up a step at each stage. And as you say, of course, if they did cross the Dnieper and take Odessa and close off the Black Sea, that would surely be a massive escalation, which it seems must surely bring the House of Cards crashing down. But as I say, we've been talking about this now for quite a long time.
Yeah, John, I call it the fallacy of common sense. See, we all work in the area of common sense, but we have decision makers that don't come to us. I mean, what makes
it's like Karl Rove.
Let me just point out that I've had enough experience, in my time with the CIA and working with military special operations forces, that there's always this assumption by the people outside that there's actually some planning, some real forethought that's gone into this. They've considered options. They've prepared contingencies. No, that doesn't happen. If it happens, it's rare. I mean, one of my classmates, when I went into the CIA and the career trainee program, years later, he was put in charge of the Iran task force around 2006. And the Bush administration was definitely planning to invade Iran. And my friend, he's in there and he's going through all these meetings. And finally, he asked the question, okay, if we do this, then what? And the answer was, oh, don't worry about it. It'll take care of itself.
Yeah.
I'm not making this up. And that is a common feature. We saw it with the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and what happened in Afghanistan, and what's going on in Syria. They don't think this through and plan. Unlike the Chinese. The Chinese are pretty diligent about, they got a 5-year plan. By God, they're going to follow it.
Yeah. Well, I think to conclude, and it's been fascinating listening to you, Larry, and we're very grateful. I'd just like to recall, I don't think I've said this before, an exchange recounted by Bob Woodward back in the George Bush junior years, so 20 years ago now, where Bob Woodward says something a little bit rather similar to what you've just said, Larry, about he raises some objection or other about maybe it was even about the war in Iraq, I don't know, and he tells the story that this person, he doesn't name him, but many people think it was Karl Rove, he said to him, well, the problem is you're in the reality-based community.
Yeah.
While we, the empire, we create reality.
Yeah.
And then you will run after us and write about the reality that we
I think that was Paul Wolfowitz said that.
Well, we don't know who it is because Woodward doesn't say, but
Oh.
I think I've heard it said it was Karl Rove, but yes, it could be.
I know the story. I know the story.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. But I mean, yes, here we are. We are, as you've just said, Peter, we're in the reality-based community, which maybe is a handicap, but on the other hand, maybe when
because it allows us to have hope, and I refuse to give up on that.
Well, when the Hemingway gradualness turns into speed, then we'll have been proved right.
Yeah, yeah.
Larry Johnson, thank you so much for giving us your time, and it's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I hope you'll come back on again.
Listen, the honor was mine to be able to hang out with you guys. It's yeah.
Well, you'll be very welcome to join us.
When you hang out with the best, you actually look competent.
That's very kind of you. Thanks very much.
You.
Take care, guys.
Goodbye,
okay,
everyone.
guys.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, we won't be broadcasting next week or the week after because it's New Year's Eve and then Christmas Eve and then New Year's Eve. But we'll see you all, we hope, in 3 weeks' time. Thank you again, Larry. Thanks.
All right,
Bye-bye.
gentlemen. Bye-bye. And Merry Christmas.
And you. Merry Christmas.